I'm Brian Scordato, and this is the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. We accelerate ideas into real companies through the Tacklebox membership, and we think through startup strategy every Wednesday on the Idea to Startup podcast. You're here because you're thinking about an idea, or you're ready to launch something, or you already launched something and you're running full steam ahead. We're here to help with the counterintuitive stuff. On to it. Today, we're talking about why it's so freaking hard for you as a founder to do things that should be objectively simple and straightforward. Why an email takes a few hours, or why you'll avoid creating simple ads for weeks, or why, even though you know you can outsource just about anything for $10 an hour, you just don't do it. My guess is you think it's a productivity problem. It's not. Today, we'll talk about what it actually is and how to fix it. But before we get there, I've got an update and I've got a request. First, the update. You might have noticed we've been mixing in some classic episodes here and there. I know a lot of newer folks haven't heard them, so I'm mixing in the ones that got the most traction and shares. The reason for this is that I'm writing a book. It's a long time coming, and so far it's been a blast. And by blast, I mean an overwhelming, frustrating, time-guzzling monstrosity. I've got about 5,000 things I want to say, but I'm trying to take my own medicine and focus on a specific moment and a single problem, a dam in the river. It turns out my medicine is much easier to prescribe than to take. So that's the update. I'm writing a book, so we'll have a few classic episodes mixed in and might even do an interview or something unscripted here or there. And now, the request. If the book sounds interesting to you, I'd love to have you on board as I write it. I'm approaching this book like I'd approach any business, so early, frequent customer feedback and tight feedback loops are the priority, which means I need some champions. This will include stuff like reading early chapters and giving feedback on the balance of Ruby anecdotes and Hemsworth jokes. There will be rewards for the champions, a few free copies of the book, and some other stuff we've been working on, like a mug I've been thinking about making for years. There's a link in the show notes where you can sign up, or you can email team@getTacklebox.com with the subject reader, and we'll get you all set up. Okay, that's out of the way. Let's knock out today's pod. No jazz, I've bothered you enough already. So, without further ado, let's all shift to sunny, suburban, some might say boring, Connecticut. Why easy stuff is hard. The leaves are changing, it's dark and 44 degrees at 7 a.m., and I'm once again trying to figure out if my boys are old enough to watch Ghostbusters. I think the answer is unequivocally no, since they're both under 3, but I can't tell you it isn't on my mind. One of the hardest parts of parenting is not zooming forward because you know once you get there, you're going to want to zoom back. Anyway, when all those things happen, you know it's local election time. Those mini sandwich board signs will start sprouting like clusters of mushrooms all over intersections and highway ramps. I took a picture of one such intersection that had 17 signs on it. Here is a quick overview. We've got a sign for Harris and Shackelford that says, New Voices, Real Change. One for Abby Tolan that says, For every child, with every in italics, passively aggressively implying that whoever her competition is very much not for every child. Then there's Nancy Kale, who says she's the, quote, healthy choice, which was so upsetting because your last name is Kale. Some sort of kale pun couldn't have been that much of a leap. And then there's David Sanderson, whose tagline is, I'm ready to do this with an exclamation point. Finally, we've got Jim, who it seems like didn't realize he needed a slogan, and as he was paying, the sign maker shouted at him, Jim, I need a slogan in the next 3 seconds, and he blurted out, Vote Jim, he's the ticket, and out it went. Poor Jim didn't even put his last name anywhere. It's like he's running against his own will. There are like 13 others that I won't get into, which were somehow even worse than that first group. So, what the heck is going on here? Are Harris and Shackelford expecting us to drive by at 35 miles per hour, pick their sign out of the mess of 16 other identical ones, see that they're offering new voices in real change, and then vote for them? And yes, I know that name recognition is useful, but that argument kind of dies when you're jammed up against 17 other identical signs. So, what's happening? Are these the best ideas that Abby Tolan and Nancy Kale and David Sanderson and our guy Jim are capable of? No, definitely not. The problem is that they're human, which means they put up their sandwich board next to 16 other sandwich boards and they hope. The hardest part about doing anything in public, whether it's running for office or starting a business, aren't the tasks associated with that thing. It's the fact that you have to do those tasks while being human. Which brings us to your risk threshold. Your risk threshold. Risk is slippery. If you're a regular listener, you know we've had a few things happen in our family the past year that were difficult. As a result, we're all in therapy to keep everything moving the right direction. Highly recommend it if you're on the fence. Anyway, one of the more helpful parts for me has been getting a better understanding of how we perceive and respond to risk. Humans have like 300,000 years where the feelings of risk were derived from a threat of bodily harm. Then, like 100 years where the stuff that had been a bodily harm risk for the previous 299,000 years wasn't a risk anymore. And our nervous systems haven't caught up. Quick note, a little tip when you start to feel stressed or flustered and the adrenaline is flowing is to stop and think, am I at risk of bodily harm? The answer is almost always no, and just acknowledging that will cool your internal jets a bit. Back to our hopeful local politicians. When humans do something like running for a local public office, it feels extremely risky because for 300,000 years, it was. Straying from the herd in any way meant risking bodily harm. Your nervous system doesn't realize that this is no longer the case. It just sees you doing something most of the people you know aren't doing, and it freaks out. This means that when it comes time for your distribution strategy, or how you're going to further publicize and spread this already risky thing you've chosen to do, ask people to vote for you, your risk threshold is already maxed out and your nervous system snaps you back like a rubber band. You already did this one risky thing, your nervous system says. Let's chill on the risk for a bit, huh, Harris and Shackelford? And that is why all the signs are next to each other. Not because it's the best idea Jim with no last name had, but because he and everyone else didn't have the nervous system bandwidth to do something else. And clustering all your signs creates a whole new herd, and that feels safe. It soothes your nervous system like a bowl of hot chicken soup. And that is why no one could even muster up the strength to make their sign 2 feet higher than all the other signs. Something you'd assume was illegal because no one does it, but I checked and it isn't. But their nervous systems were already maxed out. The Riskiness Equation. The corollary to startups is obvious. You start a company, something your nervous system hates, and it maxes out your risk threshold. After that, your nervous system pushes you to follow the safest path for the foreseeable future to try and balance out that initial risky decision. It's usually easier to navigate these sorts of problems with an equation, so knowing full well that podcasts are an absolutely horrible medium for an equation, I drew one up for how humans perceive risk. Perceived riskiness equals how many people you know who have done this thing before times how public failure would be. If you're more into visualizations, a good one is to think of risk as the distance between what your nervous system has handled before and what you're asking it to do now in public. Think of your risk threshold as your body's tolerance for standing out, and perceived riskiness as what drains it. Most people running for local government seem to be doing it for the first time. Nearly every sandwich board is talking about new voices and change. Some issue pushed them so hard that they said, you know what? I'm going to fix it myself. I'll sign up for this race and I'll tell my friends and I'll put it on Facebook and Instagram and I'll make this thing public. Perceived riskiness explodes. In the equation, very few people they know, if any, have ever done this before. And failure, not getting voted in, would be very public. It's the Negroni of all risk cocktails. For founders, it's the same. Most people you know haven't started a company. And if you're starting a company in earnest, especially if you told your friends, it's going to be public. Your risk equation will be blaring. Let's say you're building a company that'll sell inventory management software to restaurants. When it becomes clear that you need to talk to chefs and general managers of restaurants, a relatively simple task with no risk of bodily harm, your nervous system will clam up. You're layering more things that upset that risk equation on top of the already risky decision. You don't know people who have walked into restaurants cold and asked to speak to the manager or the chef and then somehow transitioned that into a customer interview or, God forbid, a sales pitch. And the fear that that manager or chef might be uninterested is the fear of public failure. Founders find that the hardest tasks are the ones most specific to their business, which is why pivoting from talking to chefs to creating a business plan is so palatable and probably something you've done. Business plans aren't foreign. You know people who've made them. You've heard about them. And failure with a business plan isn't clear and it isn't public. A business plan is very safe. way safer than talking to strangers. So make a business plan and tell people you're trying to raise money. That'll get you back to the herd. That'll calm your nervous system. If you're running for local treasurer, you could stand outside of the grocery store on Saturday mornings with coffee and donuts and talk to the 200 people who walk through about what budget item they most want fixed. Or you could knock on all the doors of voters who are impacted by a property tax increase. Or you could host a Ask Me Anything About Where Your Taxes Go night at a local brewery and film it and splice it up for social media posts or for emails. But your nervous system was already tapped out by the sheer act of running, so you'll just put up a sandwich board amongst all the other 16. Not too tall, the same height as all the rest. If you're building a startup, you could talk directly to all the chefs at restaurants in your town. Recognize that there's a very specific feature they need that'll solve a painful, urgent, expensive inventory management problem. But your nervous system is tapped, so you plan to build all the features competitors have, plus maybe a few incremental add-ons, and hope that that works. The actual founder I've been quasi talking about with the restaurant software startup found a nice go-between, a way to warm up her nervous system. She talked to some chefs, but also she went to a restaurateur Reddit thread and asked the question, "What's the dumbest thing about inventory software?" and got 50 responses. Now we're moving. Why this is so bad. The worst part of your nervous system misunderstanding risk and snapping to safety is that customers reward the exact opposite behavior. Businesses work when they help their customers make a decision, when there's a clear contrast between them and the other options, when you don't offer all the same features or show up in all the same places as your competitors. Your nervous system is actively pushing you to build a product customers won't choose. You're being sabotaged. What to do? There are a few ways to counteract this. First, you can look at the equation and change one of the variables. If a huge part of what we perceive as risky is stuff our peer group isn't doing, then we can change our peer group. Put your butt where your heart is and make sure your social network includes a whole bunch of people starting companies. Then things will naturally be less risky. The other side of the equation can also be dampened with two consistent reminders. Two things I'd write on the top of your to-do list each morning. First, no one is paying attention to what you do. Everyone is a star of their own movie. This seemingly public failure won't even register as a blip on anyone else's life except maybe your mom. In the immortal words of David Foster Wallace, you will become way less concerned with what other people think of you when you realize how seldom they do. And second, the only way you'll be successful is if you create contrast. If all your competitors offer a feature, you can't. If all your competitors advertise in one channel, find another. This might sound like bad advice, but that's just your nervous system talking. Breaking from the herd always feels like a strategic misstep. You need to start to understand and recognize that feeling and go against it. Because the only way to get someone to pick you early, before you've got testimonials and a full set of features and marketing with money behind it, is contrast. The messaging, all our competitors offer XYZ, but we don't. We offer A, and that's better for you specifically because it solves this specific problem for you, is the type of messaging that will work early on. I guess I'll add one more thing to the top of your to-do list, even though it's probably getting cluttered. When you go to do something different in your brain box, ask the question, if this fails, will it cause bodily harm? The answer will almost certainly be no, and you'll realize the risk is actually in not doing something different. This is also the key to the smaller tasks that keep tripping you up. Why you're stalled on things that seem so simple. Just ask, am I struggling because I don't know anyone who's done this and I think failure might be public, or am I struggling because there's actually serious risk? It's always going to be the first. It might feel like you've got a productivity problem, but it's just a nervous system problem, a human problem, and we can solve it. The end. It's very much not your fault that the small things are hard. Cold emails, landing pages, attending a conference, these are disasters for a risk equation, unique and public. Training yourself to understand why they're hard, reminding yourself that these aren't actually bodily risks, surrounding yourself with more people doing these sorts of things, and recognizing that contrast is your only path to success is critical. That, and if your last name is Kale and you're running for public health, maybe take advantage of that. There's a leafy green pun in there somewhere, right? Something with fiber, something about emotional cabbage. In fairness, I just spent 10 minutes trying to come up with a kale pun, and I couldn't do it. I've lost all my vegetable puns. I hope they turn up somewhere. Sorry. This was the Idea to Start a Podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. If you got a startup idea, sign up at gettacklebox.com and we can help you with it. And if you're interested in reading the book, check the show notes. Have a great week.